Assalamu alaikum, everybody. On behalf of Beacon House School System, the organizer of the School of Tomorrow events, I'd like to welcome you to the world of tomorrow, from darkness to light, the 12th edition of these SOT events. This is a fully virtual conference. This is a non-profit SOT event series. This was launched by Beacon House in 2000. I've been a part of this since 2000, so I'm very excited to see it evolve and come to where it is today. We want, through this School of Tomorrow conferences, we do want to look at conversations around the globe and open up communities and have this dialogue, which is very important for educationists and for everybody really across the board, to learn what's happening in other parts of the world and how we are all connected. I am Ayesha Kasuri. I've worked with Beacon House since a long time. Let's just say that in the capacity of first helping set up the School of Tomorrow's first child, which was TNS. We set up that school back in 2000. And now we are here and we're setting up a new school as well. So I've been working in a capacity of in headship positions, and now I'm doing project work for them in order to make sure that project-based learning and learning through play is something that we see throughout Beacon House schools, not just our flagship schools. So with that, I'd like to introduce Dr. Thomsen, who is one of the gurus of learning through play. Dr. Thomsen is the Vice President and Chair of Learning Through Play and the Lego Foundation. The function of the chair, as per Lego Foundation, is to be an expert at the highest level to execute leadership on how children and adults learn through play, and also by providing consultation at the bilateral, regional, and multinational levels to international partners. Dr. Stern has been a part of the research, has been part of his agenda, and his organizational expertise on children's development, play, and learning, in order for the Lego Foundation to be the leading authority on learning through play, and in doing so, and also advising other international companies. Is that correct, Dr. Thomsen, or did I miss something out?
No, that's very good. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great, great, great. So let's start off with talking a little bit more about your role at the Lego Foundation, and then perhaps what we can do is draw a distinction between the Lego Foundation and the Lego Corporation. How about we start with that?
Yeah. So the Lego Foundation is an independent organization, independent from the Lego Group, the company. We own 25% of the company, but with the purpose of providing systemic impact, social impact. So we support a range of interventions in terms of how children learn through play, and we support research in more than 30 countries. And we provide support to teachers, to parents, to governments, through a wide range of materials and systems and so forth. So we recognize that things like the Lego materials are extraordinarily good tools, but we go broader than that, and we are focused on systems change.
So can you talk a little bit about that? So in terms of systems change, are we talking about, can you just give me a little bit of a clue as to which direction that goes in?
Yeah, absolutely. I think particularly in situations we're in right now, we've seen that there's a lot of disruptions happening to education systems in particular right now. And we particularly see that what's needed now more than ever is a different set of skills. So we still need to understand things deeply in our education systems in terms of knowledge and science and language and so forth. But what is really the main difference is your ability to think creatively, your ability to come up with alternative ideas, and your ability to cope with difficulties as we're in right now and form new social relationships. So what we are supporting is really to re-emphasize that one of the biggest things we need right now are the things that are supported by playful experiences. It's creativity, it's critical thinking, it's collaboration. And that's actually what's on top of government minds also. It's really to think about in which way the vision from the governments can be implemented so teachers can be better equipped and parents better understand how to support their children from early childhood throughout the education system, to be someone who actually support and equipped to provide a support for societies and communities and so forth. So play is ideally positioned to build these broader skills, but the educational system is not necessarily equipped to to support this change in terms of how we assess, how we give time and equip teachers, the mindset behind the role of play. So that's kind of the main agenda in terms of changing the educational system.
So, you talked about disruption, and I do believe that once in a while disruption is very necessary for innovation and for us to get out of our comfort zones and start thinking, the start thinking outside the box, as they say. So, with something like Lego, which is so hands-on, how has this uh, Corona, COVID-19 situation, well, how have you merged the two, where it's a lot of online learning is taking place now, whereas Lego is so hands-on? And just another question, a follow-up to that would be, that yes, it's hands-on, and then, the online community, and then what you were talking about, the ongoing training of everyone in order to create those 21st century skill sets. How is that disruption taking place over these times, last few months?
I think first of all, it's what we have seen during COVID-19 is that an even more need for play, and particularly because the ability to cope with change and some of the anxieties that have been in many families in many places really require us to focus on what's really positive, optimistic, how we can be better together, and play for our well-being. So the basic skills in terms of well-being is being emphasized even more as an integrated part of knowledge and education. What is then emphasized by technologies is a few things which are quite interesting. First, it's a complete disruption of our social infrastructure. What I mean is, people are separated in ways that haven't been before. Those students from teachers, from the physical materials and places, and not being able to be together in the same way. And the delivery mechanisms in which we have provided support for students and children have also been disrupted, because we can't really deliver the same way we've done before. But what we've also seen is that actually, it's interesting, engagement becomes much more important. Like, you cannot just expect that a child or student learns because they're in the classroom, because you don't have them in the classroom necessarily in the same way. And what children are doing is only the things they're engaged in. Like, they'll just switch off if they're online, if they can't access the resources they usually do. So that becomes even more important, that you find that quality in your interactions and can sustain that. The second thing is, parents have had a much bigger role, because children moving from school and out of school and back again, and spending more time in the home, meant that parents now have a better understanding of what children's learning is, and also need to be better equipped to support it. And that's somehow a little bit good also, because actually children have been closer to what is meaningful to them, like more meaningful in terms of the home environment, the materials they have, the community in. And what's interesting now is see what works for online learning is actually having physical materials interacting, because it makes your ideas and your anxieties and imagination practical. So you get a better sense of the situation you're in when you have physical materials. And it actually can be done if you have materials at home. But the quality is done, supported by teachers still emphasizing the purpose of education. Why are we teaching? Why are we learning for? And having an ongoing feedback with the students, but then provide much more support for project-based learning, problem-based learning, and these types of approaches that require more independence. Because this is really the only way you can manage it, when it's more blended, when you're partly in school, partly at home. You give questions and ideas, and then children need to come up with longer projects in more flexible time and across the curriculum. So I'd say that's something that's very difficult in terms of the changes that have happened, but also some opportunities to think about the quality of learning that can be sustained later.
Yeah. Yeah, no, as you were talking, I was thinking that one of the foundations for PBL is for project-based learning is collaboration. And I do see collaboration being affected. Of course, people are coming up with ideas of how to collaborate while still being online and not meeting physically. And it's been challenging, but it is happening. Now, I wanted to ask another question, and mainly because for our audiences as well, that in Pakistan and in the East, play is something that is, the children play on the streets, we play with our cousins, we play everywhere, but play is play. It's not learning. right? That's what it's like, stop playing and let's come inside and do your homework. That's a classic line
Yeah.
that you hear across the world, I think. I don't think it's really just for us. But so how do we change that mindset? Stop playing and start learning. Like, come in
Yeah.
and do your homework. How does that mindset change?
That's a fantastic question, and it is. I completely agree that what we mean, what we meet many places around the world. Um, First of all, it's important to point to the benefits of play generally. Like we know, physical play, the benefits in terms of attention and problem solving, and object play when you manipulate materials and when you pretend and use your language and so forth. So there are great benefits of play. But I agree, it's mostly talked about as something for young children or in early childhood. And some of it has to do with the definitions. Like when you look up the definition of play, it's usually for recreation or enjoyment, but not for any serious purpose. And that's a little bit of shame because, for children, it's very serious. Like try to interrupt a child who is deeply concentrated into something they're trying to figure out or working with their friends. Don't do that because that's so serious for them. The other challenge is actually a little bigger, but that's also our definition of learning, because learning has often been thought of as, you're sitting individually to compete against each other in an educational setting with standardized assessments, and not broadly about making a difference, not only for yourself, for society, so a broader set of skills. So that's why we have decided to redefine play and reimagine learning. If you look at the science of how children learn, they are throwing themselves into the world to test and trying out things, and they're deeply focused and attentive to figure out how things work, and they learn so much about themselves. And that science is that they're extremely good learners. And what that says is that the quality of play is not about the activity, it's about the mindset. So actually having a mindset where you enjoy learning new things, children enjoy trying things that are difficult. They are active, not passive. That's where they learn the best. And they are supported in testing and trying out things in a different way, not only repeating again and again. And it's inherently a social process where they find things that are meaningful to them. So what we've done is to define the 5 characteristics based on the science of learning and playing. It's really about this mindset. It's about the individual experience of testing and trying out and being active. If you do that, it's actually a mindset that goes not only from young children, but into school as an effective practice and way into our adulthood. It's something we need. We are motivated by what we do in our workplaces, in our everyday environment. So redefining play, reimagine learning, a broader set of outcomes, and see how that's really translated across the system is something that where the evidence now is catching up.
And so what about rules? Play generally comes with rules and protocols. Do you think that young children are old enough to create those rules and protocols as they go along, or do they need to be directed by an adult?
Again, that's a really good question. That's what we see many are asking themselves, not only as parents, but also as teachers. And what we have published recently is try to think about a broader spectrum of our pedagogies. What we tend to think about is we instruct children that we need to get children on the same page in the beginning of a shared understanding, in the beginning of a lecture or at home. Everyone should now cook dinner or do something. And then we switch to something called free play or open-ended play. Now you can do whatever you want. Now you can go out in recess or at the playground or outdoor. What's really important is to say there's a spectrum across that. Instruction to free play with games and guidance also. The most effective practices are in the middle with guidance, which is you come up with particularly interesting challenges. Couldn't we do a project within this area with a value for these people, or trying to set particular questions that you want to explore, and the children direct how they're doing it, and that's more guidance. So what the response simplified is instruction is not bad. Like if you want to get children on the same page of a particular topic and get started to collaborate, you might need a quality instruction where you understand where children are and getting started. For instance, the first 10 minutes of in the school. And open-ended free play is also very good for self-regulation, for understanding how your feelings are and what you can do. But if you want to merge skills and deeper understanding and knowledge, you need to work in projects and problem-based learning and inquiry-based learning in the guidance, where you really constrain the topics a little bit with materials or the questions, and then let the children direct their experience and collaborate. But some of it works for different children at different points. So it's more broaden that spectrum to see more opportunities for the pedagogies.
And I think it's very important for caregivers, educators, parents, whoever is with the child, especially during these times where there is a lot of online activity going on, that they do understand that learning just doesn't mean 1 + 1 = 2. And these soft skills that we've been discussing, these are very important because they are part of conflict resolution. That, they're teaching all kinds of skills to the children that they will need, whether they are in a physical classroom or whether they're at home. So let's talk a little bit about this and say, I want to ask you, how does play promote creativity inside and outside an online learning setup? I keep going back to this only because I feel like it's very pertinent, and I've been struggling to see with the students at our schools, like, how do I send them kits home? How do I continue with creativity and project-based learning while being online?
Yeah, exactly. And that's some of the new constraints we're under right now. I'd say generally the places where it has been starting to work really well is where there's been more time given to teachers to explore this practice also. So more time for professional development, more time to think flexibly across a curriculum, more flexibly across time. So when you switch to online or blended forms of learning, one cannot just take the standard ways you've done in the classroom and just apply it and expect children sitting on a computer in scripted lessons over the course of the day. So it is a different constraint. I think in terms of creative practices and so forth, creativity is coming up with new ideas that are meaningful to you. And it can happen online and it can happen physical. Sometimes, the physical means that you are much more able to understand these ideas because you come up with ideas to do something that's new or different, but you physically build it or paint it or express it in ways that you, with your hands, can understand it also. Technologies provide a range of benefits. You can seek much greater amounts of information. You can reach out to a much larger degree of people to get input, and you can switch between different types of information, but it's more difficult to make it concrete. So what we've seen as examples is for younger children in particular, if they're reading a book, for instance, and we ask them, usually doing teachers using distance learning, to explore a book that's interesting to them and read for themselves. But then try to say, can you build a model of what's in the book? Like try to build a model of Lego bricks or cardboard, everything is to represent what's in the book, and try to present your book to the camera or document in an online portfolio. And then maybe go a little step further to say, what would be an alternative ending to that story you just built, or that book you just created? Or what would be the environment that the character in the book is living in? So usually using the curriculum and the knowledge as a starting point for something that becomes hands-on. We've also seen quite interesting examples that the children actually do understand what the challenges are or the intentions are for mathematics, for instance. And say, instead of saying, now we rehearse counting from 1 to 10 or 1 to 100 or multiplications and so forth. One example is try to lay out the numbers and addition and subtraction on the floor with a small piece of paper and ask them to invent their own ways of counting, like +1 + 1 by jumping around. So encourage children to try to find ways to count and quantify by the things they have in their everyday environment, and again, present it or document it. So we have a range of examples also on our website and what we have documented over the past years where, giving time for children to find things in the environment where they can quantify and sort and find tactile surfaces, organize it, present it, have dialogue, and then go back in some more independent work. It is a shift, but it seems to be something that actually benefit, children in some ways, and they can actually connect with their friends.
And this is where also I think one of a lot of parents get scared that, and teachers, that they will need a lot of expensive resources to create these opportunities. But we know that through the Reggio Emilia approach, and if you are in areas where you don't have access to expensive products, the world is your oyster. Nature is all around you. You use materials from your environment to create that change. But that does require that does require some intervention from the part of the caregivers or the educators. Now, I wanted to ask you a question, and this is something personally that I've been researching and looking for, which is there enough data to support that play-based learning really does make a difference to grades eventually? Is there, do we have a little, a child born right into play-based learning, project-based learning, and then a child who's like very strict rote learning? And have we tracked it somehow to see really, does it affect grades eventually? Does it affect SAT scores? Does it affect college admissions? Because that's the goalpost, right? At the end is to ensure that, well, I think it should be that the child is happy and knows what they want to do in life. But of course, for a lot of people, it's also which college they're going to, and how they're going to progress in their lives. Are they going to be a lawyer, a doctor, or an engineer? So is there data that supports? All I'm looking for is really just let the children play. So I want to something concrete out there for us to share with our audience.
Yeah. But there are a few different things. It's not, the really huge correlations between play and long-term outcomes. But there are a few things that are really promising that direction, and which we use also for governments and education systems. The first thing to start with, again, is that we have seen from longitudinal studies that the things that makes one successful in life is not whether you understand knowledge or whether you do good in grades. One of the key characteristics of success academically and for your community and yourself and your well-being is a joy of learning. Yeah. So the California longitudinal study running for 40 years, along with reviews of personality studies, indicate that if you really enjoy learning new things, you enjoy the challenges, you keep learning. You keep diving into finding information, challenging yourself, testing and trying out your skills. So that's kind of where the longitudinal are. And also, the ones who do well in their 20s in terms of high academic success, being able to maintain a full-time job, they were the ones that we looked into the preschool, the kindergartens, the preschool classrooms and observed them there. They were sharing ideas with others. They were negotiating. They were not just complying, they were negotiating. Like, how does it figure out? Or why did you do that? And so forth. But they were sharing ideas, helping each other, negotiating. Follow these children for 20 years, you see they get higher academic success. Better jobs and so forth. But it means that the social skills, the physical and moving around, the emotional skills are actually the ones that sustain success for longer. We then go to the specifics of what you're saying. It is difficult to argue for play if you only think about academic success. If you only think about memorization, it's very effective if you think about the deep understanding of things. So if you want to learn the triangles and the hexagons and the numbers, you need to memorize. If you want to understand that, here are 10 things and the one is smaller and the one is bigger, you need to play and test around, you need to make it meaningful. So a depth of understanding of topics like science is greater supported by things like playful experiences. But then an example I think is interesting from New Zealand was they compared children in traditional schools in kindergarten with more creative approaches, similar to Reggio Emilia or Rudolf Steiner and so forth. And they followed them into grade 7. And what they figured out is that in the beginning, the children from the creative schools do not memorize numbers and letters as good as the comparative school, the traditional model, but they caught up at grade 7. They were at the same level at grade 7, only for one thing, they had a greater vocabulary. They have a greater understanding of words. And why is that? So it's obviously because when you have creative materials, you have a different shades of color, you're able to touch and feel things in the everyday environment, your language improves. You understand that red is not only the color of one thing. So it means on the long term, play-based learning is certainly much more effective, not only for knowledge, but for skills and your joy of learning. You want to keep learning. Also, if someone tells you you don't need to learn this any longer, you don't need to continue. Say, well, of course, I want to learn, I want to improve. So there's definitely enough for us to say that learning through play is something to sustain from early childhood continuously through school and into adult life.
Oh, good. So that's a great segue. A couple of things. I think I must be doing something right because my daughter refers to colors as teal and fuchsia. So I'm glad she's 4. So she is playing a lot. But let's segue into this, what you just last said. When does learning through play end, or does it? we do tend to see a shift. Once children are up to about fifth grade, suddenly parents do start worrying about standardized testing, and now they're going towards an exam, and you have to get good scores. And then somehow, I was just mentioning this to my friends the other day, that there is that one time in life when that's the last time you went to the playground and played with your friends. You just don't know when that moment was, when you stop playing. So how do we continue post 12 years of age, or maybe 10 years of age? How do we continue doing this, and what would that look like?
So I think one of the good news is that we might actually do it a little bit. We may not just really see it or recognize it, but it is so inherently valuable and important for adults to play also, and for adolescents to keep playing. But the reason I'm saying we may not doing it is because if we associate play only with being in the playground or in the trees or doing a lot of games, then we can see, well, I'm not doing these activities. But it might be you still do sports, or it might be you still dream about where you go on holiday, or it might be that you still have hobbies, like something you really care for, whether it's sewing or crafts or doing things in your community. That's inherently about play, because it's something you enjoy for the sake of doing it. It's something where you are active and not just sitting passively. You are actually participating. So I think many of these instances, we are actually doing it. But the most effective and what is really needed is to switch to this idea that play is not an activity, but it's when we engage deeply in projects we care about. We engage deeply in what are the problems we can solve, what are the things that are difficult, and how we can be deeply commit to finding information and testing and trying out approaches to this, and questions and collaborative forms of learning, experiential forms of learning. And that actually continues into adulthood. We are doing projects. We're not just standardizing and repeating what we're doing. But it is a little difficult if our education system was based on us getting used to sitting still and being told what to do. Our brains are wired for these kind of habits, and then it's difficult to kind of be more flexible in a way of thinking. And we really need to have a system to begin to say, oh, maybe I could do this a little different. Maybe I can take a different path to work because I see something new. Maybe I could change one ingredient in the dinner I'm doing, because it was a good dinner, but maybe I could change one thing and see if I could taste the difference. And actually, what's interesting, the one thing people have figured out that really works generally for cognitive flexibility, for us to be a little more flexible in the way we think, is to observe children. Yeah. So there's a really good study, particularly from the science centers, and I'm sure that will resonate with Radio Emilia also, that when you observe children who are trying to figure things out, testing different solutions, messing around material, trying to structure it, you realize, that's quite interesting. Actually, they enjoy it and they get something out of it. So the main way to introduce cognitive flexibility is to spend much more time with children.
Yes. And I think that it's also important for us to understand just what you said right now, is to listen to children. A lot of our work is about documenting what children are saying. And
Absolutely.
I say that outside to all educators and people who are listening, who are parents, just listen sometimes without interruption to when your child is even creating that little Lego set, and they're just making a playground or something. Just listen to what they're saying, and those conversations are such beautiful openings into a wider discussions that one can have. But culturally, we do tend to somehow, go and fall into, well, adults are talking, please be quiet, children, and so we go into this. And I think we need to listen a lot more to children. And
I think I just want to add on that, because that is a perfect point, like listening and observing, and then moving to a space where we do not need to know. Like we don't know what the result is or what the truth is and so forth, because that's increasingly what we come into with such an amount of information that is available, and the world is more complex. As a teacher, you can't know everything, but listening, as you say, and observing, and then helping, asking questions like, why did you do this? Or can you show me the way you did this? Or how does it look like if you, and so providing other types of process question by that listening mode and documenting, I think it is a really, really effective approach in that mindset.
Yeah, and one of the other things, and when I was thinking of what all to ask you, and I was thinking about it, and I was thinking about questions that I want answered. So
Mhm.
I've been to Legoland. I've been to I lived in Copenhagen for 4 years. I've been around a lot of Lego in my life, but believe it or not, I could never actually copy anything that came out of that box to look like what it looked like in that box, because my idea, and I was always like that since I was a child, and this happens to a lot of people, I'm very bad at following instructions. So I'd like to come up with my way of what this castle should look like. And so how does Lego promote that kind of creativity? Because it does come with a set of premeditated maps, and it does say that this is what this will look like. I mean, I couldn't even attempt to do some of those, the big ones that you have, but the little ones. How do you think how is that? How do you justify that? Like there's a blueprint, copy it, but actually no, just be creative.
Mhm. Yeah, so first, just to say that I'm from the Lego Foundation.
Yes.
We work broadly than the Lego product, and I don't have a depth understanding of the product development, the way that they're done. But generally, it's important to say that plays a flexible approach, which means that some children really enjoy having clear expectations and guidance and so forth to build something that they can complete. And others are more into these more guidance, like this is a play theme. How would you actually play out this in different ways? Or other completely supportive, just diving into open-ended boxes of bricks. And actually, all that spectrum is supported by the Lego experiences and other kind of materials. But obviously, some of them are probably something what are mostly being bought. I think what's most important is to think about, the children need. Different children actually find comfort in different approaches. So if one wants to build through instruction and actually follow the instructions and problem solve and so forth, it's actually a good thing. It's still a creative process in the sense that you're manipulating things, you're trying to figure out where they are, you look at spatial relations, it's a lot about quantifying, sorting, and mathematics. You can talk about the model while you go, it's about language. But when you come to the end of the product, what's most important is to not only celebrate, to say, whoa, did you build this amazing house? But to say, I really support the struggle you went through, the difficulty of how to build it. Maybe if you could adjust it a little bit or rebuild it a little bit. So if you build this model today and you build this one a few weeks ago, can you combine these two? Like, if this character was living in this house, was going to live in that house, how would you adjust and rebuild it a little bit? So I think instructions are not only from bricks instructions to one model, but that model can be adapted. That mindset that you are able to take things apart and adapt or combine with other things is extremely important. And that sometimes create a more comfort with some children and also with parents, to say it's not completely, it doesn't need to be completely instructive or completely open-ended, which also exists in boxes, but you can actually follow a path, change it, adapt it a little bit, and that's the most important, that they enjoy the process of playing.
Yes, and so you just touched upon something, which is that the process
Yeah,
is more important than the final product.
yeah.
And generally, sometimes that's where us educators do miss out, because we're not very good at documenting the process of learning as it's going along. And the child is also then focused on the product and what
Mm,
am I going to make at the end of all of this. And that kind of takes it into like, that world of where just products are important.
mm,
So I do think, and I think that's a very valid thing, that educators out there listening must understand the process before giving so much weightage to the end product.
mhm.
So can you just, because I don't think we got that clarification right in the beginning, but I think just for the sake of our audience, it would be good to just draw a distinction between the foundation and the corporation. If you could just
Mhm.
talk about that just for a little while, just so that we know exactly what the role of the Lego Foundation is.
Yeah, definitely happy to. So the Lego Foundation is independent from the company, and the main purpose is social impact. So it's not a profit, it's non-profit, and it's be able to evaluate whether children develop the skills they need most in life through playful experiences. We work through more than 30 countries in a model that is based on evidence and programs that are scalable with local partners and buy-in. So who is able to have an interest in supporting these from the government, from the education system, from parents. And then we have initiatives. So we have 15 different initiatives. One, for example, is on playful parenting. How can we help parents recognize the importance of playing in the everyday environment and support that? Another example is working with teachers, both pre-service and in professional development. So with pre-service, we are supporting play labs, like physical materials, the mindset of the practice of learning with children in the teacher colleges. So in Denmark, for instance, we have now play labs across all teacher colleges. And then we have professional development, something called Play Accelerator in 5 different countries, where we help teachers to equip them with these practices that sometimes are a little more difficult because they take more time. You have to manage the classroom in different ways. So we work with organizations who can provide that coaching and support materials to teachers. So we have initiatives across parents, across teachers, and also changing the skills. And that's one of the crucial things, working with governments and multilaterals like UNDA and OECD and others to say, the end outcomes of what we seek to achieve is not knowledge and curriculum outcomes and grades and education itself. It's making a difference for society. So that's why it's a broader set of skills. So getting everyone on the radar that collaboration, creativity is actually what we should strive towards. So that's why we work with governments and international organizations. So we are a partner, we are a funder, and we provide support for activities. Sometimes Lego bricks is part of it if it's useful in that context. But we are broadly about all types of play with the inner qualities of joy of learning and experimentation.
And can you tell me, I'm really interested in, and I'm sure our audience also heard that, what does a play lab for teachers look like?
So a play lab is what we did a few years back. What we looked back at some of the standards for the knowledge, the theories that are equipping teachers, and many of these are quite good. Teachers are getting generally a good understanding of the profession and of learning, but some of it is very theoretical back from 20, 40 years ago. So the first thing is to equip teachers with the new knowledge about neuroscience, how the brain works, how children learn, how they keep on learning. So that's part of a refined curriculum. But then teaching that, again, like we teach children, like we need to teach ourselves with practical materials. So each teacher colleges have a lab of a range of different materials. They can prototype, with cloth or with clay or with bricks or with technologies. They need to experience it hands-on to be able to understand their own practices. So they can prototype activities, they can build things they are insecure about, and talk to their colleagues about it. So these labs are basically social spaces where you can exchange ideas, talk about struggles, and a low-risk environment. And then it's also about, obviously, practically knowing materials, which is one of the biggest difficulties sometimes of creative approach in education. You need to be familiar with how do you organize and manage many different materials for a setting that is into children, and some of these are also a little more into the future into classroom. So obviously they need to be able to test out new types of technologies, not only computers but also laser cutters and 3D printers, and being a little more at the forefront of what happens before they go into the classroom. So it's essentially these social, very practical spaces where you're allowed to take risk and test out your pedagogies in very practical ways.
Yes, that's another word you just said, risk. So we do have to teach our children to be risk takers. And one of the things, I think we're closing up on our session, so I just want to get a few questions in before we go to audience questions. So one of the things is, I've seen this. Once you build a Lego set somewhere, and I always think about this, it sometimes collects dust for like years because somebody's been so proud of how they've made this giant battleship and they've just kept this like on a pedestal somewhere in their house. It takes courage. And it does take risk-taking to undo that model and try to recreate something. So that's something that I want people out there to think about, that it's not just about doing, but it's also undoing some of the things that you've done and relearning them in a way that perhaps when you did it 2 years ago, the battleship was enough. But in 2 years, your mind has evolved to a point that you can take that and make it look like the Colosseum, so
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah.
that's interesting. I think we are going to some questions from the audience right now, and we do have some coming up, and one of them is, how do I change the mindsets of parents in this regard? So I think that's again a question going back to play, and how do we change the mindset of the parent? Is there a direct answer to that?
There's not one direct answer, but I have a few opportunities to look into. But it is one of the main questions, because I also see many places around the world. We have put a lot of effort in thinking about how to change teachers, but it's that teachers are quite equipped. They know the practices, but sometimes the government or the parents is not what they expect in the classroom, what they're doing. But what we've seen is to speak directly about the qualities that you seek to achieve in the classroom. Sometimes parents expect that they do really good in grades, just numeracy or literacy or language and science and so forth. But to ask them what quality would one need to see if that happens, it's not only about whether they memorize the facts, but when they bring home projects they've done that are unexpected, or when they have had critical questions to what and how they're doing it, when they have shared with others, they have a deeper understanding. To try to talk to the parents to say, you see that they build these new things or they create this new idea, that actually helps their deeper understanding, and try to document that kind of quality in the classroom. Then I think the bigger picture of this is really keep emphasizing that in order to equip children to be self-directed, independent learners in the future, where they need to learn new things that they don't know what is, they need to be able to come up with new types of ideas. They need to collaborate with others. They need to have empathy. They need to be critical thinkers. So there are quite good studies to say the outcomes is not only about doing good in academics. That does not help you on the long term. It helps you get into university maybe. You see, success is really about something else, and it's okay to take risks. It's okay to talk about and document different types of models. The dialogue between teachers and parents are so crucial. So it's also really establishing that link. And actually, I want to mention that as part of the COVID-19 and blended forms of learning, I've seen that actually have been easier. For one main reason, in places where you have documented more of children's work online and parents have been part of that journey. And if you have an online portfolio where what you've done at home or in the school and you document it online, you can go through what children have been doing and the reflections. Parents begin to get, it is actually a process. It's not an outcome that is easy to achieve. It's a process of reflection, a process of documentation, and they begin to learn. I inherently think that everyone wants to do the best for children, but we need to reorientate ourselves to what conversation we have together about this quality, and documentation, online, physical, what do we observe is really a really good medium.
Yep, that's a great answer. Please do learn to observe your children more. Another great question has come in, and this one is, how can Lego build awareness and a sense of responsibility about climate change and sustainability?
So climate change and sustainability is extremely crucial for the Lego Foundation. One of the things we do is to, as much as we can in our interventions around the world, to use everyday materials. So to re-emphasize that play is really about reappropriating things you have in your mind. So play labs in Bangladesh, for instance, you take a clay and form into small toys, and you can burn it again and make other things out of it. Or you can take wood, or the local bicycle manufacturer, take a wheel, begin to use that one. So it's really about the ideas that play and learning does not exist in the product. It exists in the process of taking materials and reusing and turning them into activities. Then I would say that the way we can think more responsibility about that, which we also do with the Lego company, is to really put it high on the agenda in any kind of our curriculum educational discussions. Children care so much for the environment for good reasons, and they really want to ask questions on how do we consume, what's the energy, how do we reuse, what do we eat, to make that part of an integrated discussion and help children document and speculate and come up with ideas for it. I think that's a really good way of starting that discussion, and it'll develop all the skills as part of that theme.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. There's another question. How does Lego therapy work for autism or any other learning needs? I guess what they're trying to say is, does it work for people that are differently abled? Lego therapy.
Yeah, so play definitely works in the sense that it is like kind of a flexible strategy where the main thing you keep in mind is, do the individual child enjoy the process of what they're engaged in right now, have the opportunity to express being active and so forth. There's quite a significant amount of work in autism and Lego. Some of it's behind me here, around Lego studies and so forth. So Lego therapy has been done over the years. As a starting point, some of these strategies just include that when you build and make things with Lego, you split the roles of instruction and builder into different parts. So you are several children building a Lego model. One have the instructions, one needs to build, and the other one needs to orchestrate the process. So you actually get familiarity with each other's roles and how you collaborate by doing something active. And I think that can be generalized in different ways. We just made public a review of autism research with University of Cambridge. So we did a systematic review where you can see all the different kind of interventions that's been used, the impact on children with play. So it's really about, if you have materials and you're playing, it's much more easier to relate to each other because you're using the materials instead. You can structure this with the materials. So it's a good strategy for autism also.
And there is another question, but I wanted to ask, you talked about Cambridge. I was looking on your website. You are working with other universities in terms of research and building materials and labs. Am I correct? I think there was some collaboration with Project Zero at Harvard.
Yeah, so before I became the chair of Learning Through Play, I was the head of research at the Lego Foundation for the past decade. We now have roughly 16 different research partnerships. We were starting a research center at University of Cambridge on children's play, learning, and development. We have a research center in China focused on creativity at Tsinghua University. We are having a lab at the Lifelong Learning Lab, also at the MIT Media Lab on technologies and play and learning with professorships and faculty and so forth. Harvard University has two angles. One is around children supporting play under adversity, so really difficult circumstances with toxic stress and humanitarian areas, but also really, like right now, stressful environments. And then we have the pedagogy of play, which is looking at the practices of supporting teachers in the classroom to integrate these play-based approaches through asking different questions, form social collaboration, support their professional development, and also informing school leadership, because that's also a lead that one needs to take. So we have these range of partnerships. We are supporting research centers, but it's all integrated with the idea that we are not producing and supporting knowledge for the sake of new science. We really wanted to be part of intervention that can change things for teachers and parents and children at the end of the day on ground.
Okay, so is there any research? You did talk about Bangladesh, and so where are there outreach programs specific in this region?
So broadly defined, I think we don't have at this point programs in Pakistan, but in that area, there are some emerging things in India, and we've done quite a lot of work in Bangladesh. So I'm very reluctant to generalize a region, but just to say we are broadly in all parts of the world. The thing in Bangladesh have been based on remote areas to introduce play labs, and there are a few key things about these play labs. First, as I mentioned, basically similar to Radio Mila, they're based on local materials. They built literally a space out of local materials, a community-owned space, where they take existing materials and use it to as activity, toy-making spaces with parents and children. And then there are play leaders. So young adolescent women are the leaders of these spaces to help and being educated in developing new learning activities. And then it's a discussion with the government also to say, how can we embed these practices more into the curriculum and these areas? It's also used, the play labs now, into Cox's Bazar and the Rohingya refugee camps, where similar practice is just so much needed in these places of scarcity. So similar ways, trying to find the best out of materials and provide additional stimulation and provide these, safe ground for children to play and express themselves. But the play labs like this in Bangladesh is also contextualized in different forms and shape in East Africa, in Colombia, and other places. So that's things that grew out of the region you are in, and actually inspire other places to do similar kind of things.
Yeah, no, that sounds very inspiring. I'm thinking about it. Play leaders, and in rural areas, that would be wonderful for Pakistan as well. So that is something perhaps that we can continue talking about after we are offline, Dr. Thompson, and start thinking about how we can bring you to Pakistan.
Yeah, no, definitely.
One of the questions that is coming out is how does play-based learning support formative assessment?
So play-based learning is inherently a type of formative assessment, and the reason being that summative assessment works for certain kind of things, accountability among districts and nations and so forth, and how do you compare to each other. But formative is when you express what you have in your hands, and when you document the projects you've done, put them on the wall, engage children to have ideas and critique each other. But it's also an integrated part of assessment where children come up with their own types of assessment. I think that, if you look at the benefits for learning, they hypothesize, what would I get out of this? What is quality? How would I assess how this is good? And how would I engage in conversation with others about the value of this product? And children are extremely good at knowing who they are, how other children are in the classroom, and how they can critique each other. That's why I think actually some of the technologies that have been introduced over COVID-19 and blended forms of learning have been helpful. Because when you document more for online, if you do that, not only sit in video conferences and talk about learning and content, but document, put it online, and compare, that has been really interesting, and give feedback on this. So play is inherently a form of formative assessment, because you need to make it practical, hands-on, and share it, and document, observe, and reflect on it. And that's most effective for learning.
Yep. I always think about that through visible thinking, instead of putting the products up, just document the thought process, and you'll see so many opportunities happening right there. Okay, so there's another one. This must have come from a teacher, because they say that because there's teachers say they need a lot of time exploring and creating requirements that are demanding. So how can teachers make the time and space for this ongoing PBL? Or I think what they're asking really is that even in order to create the provocations for children, in order to set up elaborate project-based projects, they have to do a lot of work on the back end. And like we're saying, so when do teachers have time to do that? Because especially now, some teachers are working in hybrid models, where there's some in-person classes happening, but then they switch to online. And then should we be putting this demand on top of it?
I'll start by saying that, what I see around the world is that teachers are doing a phenomenal job, and they may not have the time for it as much as they should, particularly not the professional development, to develop new activities, to talk to other colleagues and so forth. So there is a huge need to recognize the importance of this work and how it's done from the leadership and from governments, to say this practice is one of the most important practices we have in society. Why do we only give time and value the things that are in the classroom, and not the preparation and professional development? So that's a big push we're doing right now. It's part of ensuring that you help governments and school leaders to recognize that other competencies are needed, because you don't necessarily need to prepare as much if what's really the main aim of your curriculum and so forth is to come up with new ideas, or collaborate, or engage in critical thinking. So what my suggestion practically is to think simpler about the materials you have. You don't need a ton of different materials, but in terms of the activities, you can select a few different materials, and then being able to use the existing curriculum, but in a new way. So for instance, in history lessons, sometimes you can ask children to take one event of a history lesson and say, you should read about this, I can outsource. You can see a video for the first 10 minutes to learn about this. Now you have to come up with an alternative ending for that event in history. So describe an idea, build a prototype. So these small tricks for creativity, I've taught you how to count to 10, or 5 plus 5 is 10. Show me 5 different ways that you can multiply to 10. So changing around this mindset, if that's possible to do with small activities, you will be much more better equipped to actually being able to share knowledge more effectively through technology or videos, and then provide these small challenges where you have to do a little less and still doing more. And the more they do and the more they're active, the more they learn. So it's taking these knowledge in the curriculum and changing a little bit, and that helps.
Tweaking the system for yourself. So we have 2 minutes left, but a very interesting question came through Twitter, and I just want to ask this, Dr. Thomsen, maybe a 1-minute reply before we can wrap up. So this question is, can we really persuade fearful parents and governments to trust in play?
Yes, we can do that, and we've seen it done. So I think we are on the brink of a revolution in this area, because exactly what governments are looking for is creativity and collaboration, empathy, and so forth. They know they need it, but they don't know how. Parents, more than ever at this point, realize that what's needed is to have emotional regulation, to think differently about your everyday life right now, and to have well-being. So particularly right now, we have seen among parenting programs and working with countries around the world, it's the right time to talk about play. But remember, it's a mindset. It's not an activity. Do children enjoy learning? Do we enjoy what we do? Are we active and not passive waiting? Are we allowed to take risk and experiment? Yes, absolutely. It will, in a decade from now, it will be the main practice.
Wow, music to our ears. So with that, thank you so much, Dr. Thomsen. We appreciate the time that you took out and had this conversation with us. I'd like to wrap up just by saying that, some of the things that we talked about were the other skills other than numeracy and literacy, although they are very important and they are part of our learning. But I think one of the conclusions that we've come to, or we know, is that what you really need to do is create a love for learning in your child, they are all born with a natural curiosity. We have to keep that curiosity going. Let them ask questions. I know how it's annoying for some mothers when they are cooking at the stove and it is a why, how. But that is what you need to fuel. That is the fire that needs to be fueled before anything else. And one of the other things that you talked about was changing, again, just rethinking and tweaking our goalposts. And we are doing, everybody around the world, especially teachers, are doing a wonderful job. They do tend to be hard on themselves, but if they just think of listening, documenting, and tweaking some of their outcomes, we will be able to bring play into our everyday lives. I think one of the most important things, and right after this, I may be writing to the Oxford Dictionary, is to change the definition of play, because that's something that we've talked about, is how we look at play. And think about it, everyone out there right now, think in your homes, how can we redefine play? Thank you so much, Dr. Thomsen. I appreciate it. And we hope to see you, the Lego Foundation, and Learning Through Play in Pakistan very soon.
Thank you very much. Yeah, keep playing, everyone. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be here.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.